G'day and welcome to the Hunting Connection podcast. My name is Zach Williams and I am your host. Here we'll connect you with hunters, fishers and outdoor enthusiasts from around the globe. This podcast will share hunting and fishing stories, including past experiences, and tackle the tough hunting stereotypes our community faces. We hope to be a positive influence to those outside the community while also having a laugh along the way. Hope you enjoy the podcast. G'day and welcome to another episode of Hunting Connection podcast. On this episode, it's a very exciting one for myself as we've got Barry Howlett, the chairman of the Blond Bay Hog Deer Advisory Group on. How you going, mate?
Yeah, well, thanks, Zach. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. I'm very excited. Off to go hunt Snake Island in about 3 weeks' time, so I've been very, very excited for this podcast.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you're period 2?
Yeah, period 2. So looking very much forward to it. It's a big journey from Adelaide down here over to there. So yeah, I'm envious. It's a fantastic opportunity. So yeah, it is. Judging by a few people I've spoken to, one of the emergencies in my group, he had been applying for 30 years and he drew an emergency spot and got in that way. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So where are you from, Barry?
I live in Gippsland in Victoria. So where the hog deer ballots happen is sort of further east and further south from me, but I'm right in the middle of Gippsland, which is sort of deep in the heart of, I suppose, what you call traditional deer hunting country in Victoria. Grew up with sort of sambar hunting all the way to the north, and then we've got the hoggies down on the coast. So pretty cool spot to live if you're into deer. Yeah,
it's beautiful. I did a sambar trip down there a few years back over to Orbost area and caught up with a friend over there. And yeah, it's just a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah. We like living here, so yeah.
Yeah, it's hunters and fishermen's paradise, that's for sure. So, what do you do for work, Barry?
I actually work for SSAA Victoria, Sporting Shooters Association.
Beautiful.
Communications manager there. So I came across to SSAA on about May last year after about 9 years with the Australian Deer Association.
Very nice. So you live and breathe hunting and shooting, which is great to hear.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I was sort of lucky enough to make my passion my job. So yeah, a lot of people don't get that privilege, so it's a real privilege for me.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely sounds that way. That's for sure. So, how did you get into hunting and the outdoors lifestyle?
I didn't come from a hunting family per se. I'd always, when I was really young, I had an uncle who fished, who'd take me fishing occasionally, but really got into it with mates. Growing up in Gippsland, I was lucky enough to go to school with guys who had properties and we go out rabbit shooting and doing that sort of stuff. And one of my mates from our teen years was from a very big hound hunting family. So when I was sort of in my late teens to early 20s, he dragged me up to the hound camp to go and hunt with his dad. And went on one hound hunt and I was hooked and didn't miss a weekend for about 10 years after that.
That's awesome. I've seen lots on hound hunting. I've never done it myself. I'm very curious on it. Eventually, I hope to get somebody on. I've been given a few different names and contact people to get on to chat about hound hunting and bring some more positive light towards it. It definitely looks like a ball of fun, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's a really dynamic form of hunting. And for an introduction to deer, I thought it was a really good apprenticeship. You're with a lot of experienced hunters all the time. You get to see a lot of deer. Probably the first few years hound hunting before you figure out what you're doing, you see them dead more than alive.
Yeah.
But you get to be a part of a hunt and see the deer and learn your sign and learn where your deer are coming from and how they move and how they use the bush. And I think it was a really good apprenticeship. It also forces a bit of a discipline if you're going to be part of that team. It becomes an all-encompassing thing. Sort of, we hunted every weekend that we could. The core members of the team are expected to be up there every weekend. They're expected to be there on Wednesday night doing the cut-up of the deer. They're expected to be pitching and looking after the hounds over summer. So it becomes sort of an all-encompassing hunting lifestyle, I suppose.
Is that still your primary way of hunting these days?
No, not so much. I'm still in touch with those guys and welcome and go up with them when I can, but with family and time constraints and different work constraints, I tend to go stalking, and I got involved in Sunday Island about 6 or 7 years ago. So a lot of my leisure time and a lot of my spare time, I suppose, is spent over on the island mucking around with the deer over there.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. Yeah, there seems to be lots of different conservation projects and stuff going over there, and like whole little. I've heard bits and pieces like a few years ago you could buy stakes in the island or something like that to go over there and.
Yeah, it's a cooperative. It's about 65 years old, the co-op, and yeah, it's owned by the members. So there's I'll get the numbers wrong, but somewhere around 200 shares available in the co-op. So people can join. Interested hunters can come for an open day and join the island, buy a share, and then they're a part of it.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I've seen a few photos from the weekend that you guys just had for the information weekend for the ballot. It definitely looked like a great weekend. So
yeah, it's an ideal place for doing something like that. We're really lucky to have the education weekends sort of been held in different places over the years, but when the team came up with the idea of going to the island, and we were able to make the logistics of that work of getting 40 extra guests onto the island on a Saturday and back off on a Sunday, and finding somewhere for them to sleep and feeding them and all that. It's a really great place to have an education weekend because you're amongst the deer in their habitat. For people who haven't had much experience with hog deer, they're quite small. The name suggests that they're about the size of a small pig.
Yeah.
And it's in that sort of tussock country, which is classic of what you'll probably see when you get to Snake Island. It gave people a real eye-opener of just how difficult they can be to see. They can hide in plain sight. You can be on a big open plain, and there'll be deer in behind the tussock, and you just can't see them there until they move.
Because big stags are, about 70 centimetres high and about 55 kilos, 60 kilos-ish?
Yeah. The coastal ones would probably top out at around 50s, a really big stag.
Okay, wow.
For the coastal, those mainland deer tend to get a bit bigger. They're just on improved pasture all their lives. But yeah, so they're not sheep or pig-sized animal.
Yeah, wow, that's insane. I've seen them from a distance. There's a small farm here in South Australia, just off of the Southeastern Freeway, that has a small enclosure with them. And if you look hard enough, you can just see them from the road. So that's as close as I've seen one alive. So there's a few different species of deer on Sunday Island. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've got two species. We've got hog deer, and there were fallow deer introduced there in the late 70s as a second species for the members to hunt. The co-op's primarily focused on managing hog deer, though. It's called Para Park, and Para's one of the early names for hog deer. And it's the sole focus is managing the hog deer, but along with the hog deer, we've got that second species of fallow, which when they were introduced was a real novelty. Yep. You couldn't hunt fallow deer anywhere in Victoria, and they were very hard for people to get access to. And now they're ubiquitous. Where I live here in West Gippsland, we had one show up on a small farmlet that's in town about 500 metres from my house last year, and there seems to be fallow deer everywhere. But when they were introduced to the island, they were a really rare thing.
Yeah, wow. And is there a couple of small enclosures on there too? So I've got some European fallow.
Yeah. There's a small study pen with a couple of Hungarian fallow deer in there, and another pen that's just got some hog deer. It's probably a hangover from the early days when the island first started. There was little known about hog deer, and lots of the stuff we know internationally about hog deer came from the study pen on Sunday Island. So
that's awesome.
Learning about their mating habits and gestation periods and all that sort of good stuff. The pen's probably not really used much for scientific research anymore. We've probably learnt what we're going to learn, but it's still nice to have deer in a pen that it's a nice big open pen. The deer are happy there and comfortable, and if we got guests down and we can't see any deer in the field, or it's during hunting season and we can't take them out, we can take them and still have a look at the deer in the pen.
That's awesome. That's so good. So hog deer, how did they get to Australia?
They're brought in by the Acclimatisation Society, which was the forerunner of the Melbourne Zoological Society that now runs the Melbourne Zoo, and they brought in all sorts of weird, wonderful critters. They brought the samba in. They brought all different sorts of plants, rabbits, foxes, all sorts of things to make Australia a bit more like home for the English settlers.
Yep.
So they came to Australia in 1861, the first population of hog deer, and they got released into the wild in 1865. So they've been here for quite some time, but they're brought in from India or Sri Lanka. The history is a bit clouded, but they came over on a steamship from those places and released into the wild here in Victoria.
That's awesome. Do you know how many roughly were originally released, or?
Off the top of my head, it was a small number, sort of 10 deer or thereabouts.
And what's there now, about 3,000?
Yeah, somewhere in that vicinity.
Victoria,
there was a study done a few years ago that went to put a number on them. There's been an awful lot killed on Wilson's Promontory and a cull since then. But there's some really good, strong populations on the mainland. We've got a good, strong population on Sunday Island, a good number on Snake Island. So, there'd easily be probably 3,000 of them in that Victorian range. That's
awesome. Is that more than their home area?
Really hard to get good information. It's war-torn, civil wars going on where they come from, and they're certainly listed as threatened with the International Union of Conservation of Nature, so they're not doing terribly well in their home range. It's probably the most stable and secure population of hog deer in the world, of wild hog deer anyway, is in coastal Victoria.
Am I right by saying that it's the only huntable population in the world? Wild huntable population?
Wild huntable population, yeah. There's some behind wire stuff in Texas.
Yep.
Just like there's just about every critter on earth you can imagine to hunt in Texas if you want to, I think. But
I've been over there. There's some interesting animals roaming the sides of the roads, that's for sure.
but where you're going to Snake Island, I'd consider to be the best public land hunting opportunity for hog deer in the world.
That's awesome.
And if you look at the private land stuff, there's a property here in Gippsland that does a really awesome job of managing them. But they've had hunters like Jim Shockey and people like that come over and hunt hog deer on that property. So when it comes to wild hog deer, Victoria's the pinnacle.
That wouldn't be, is it Corrie on the hog deer group? Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, that's their place.
Yeah, pay attention to that group, especially after drawing a spot. And the management that he does looks like he does great, clearing a lot of samba out the area. Do they clash a bit, do they, or just samba outcompete the hog deer?
Yeah, more outcompete them for food and that sort of thing rather than clash with them. And those people with that private land management have done an awful lot for mainland hog deer. There's probably more hog deer in coastal Victoria as a result of them being there and managing them privately for hunting. So it's a really good thing.
And on the gene side of thing, I had one of my mates who's a biologist do a bit of looking into hog deer, and he was saying that Chital have pretty strong genes in the Australian population.
Yeah, there was a study done again 4 or 5 years ago that indicated that there were Chital markers in the DNA of the hog deer in Australia. What's probably not known is where that came from. So whether the deer were picked up in the subcontinent that came here with that already in their DNA, or whether it happened in Australia. It's speculated that they could have interbred in an enclosure in Australia, but it's pretty unlikely they'd do that. Who knows? But what the missing piece of that puzzle, I suppose, the DNA they used to compare from India came from a very, very small sample. To understand the DNA in the homeland would be the missing piece of the puzzle to understand what that means in an Australian context. But they're certainly, if you look at them, they look like a hog deer. They run like a hog deer. They taste like a hog deer. They're a hog deer.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd never heard that about the whole chittle bit until one of my mates looked into it, and it blew me away. And yeah, we had that same conversation whether, if it was like when they've introduced it here and they've introduced chittle as well, because they released a number of different deer species into Australia, or if it was something that was just in their DNA from their homeland. So,
and they are really closely related, like Samba and Rusa are, so the scientific name is Axis and Axis porcinus for chittle and hoggies. So they've always been known to be very, very close genetically to begin with.
And that would be why they're both two of the best eating deer species in the world, I've heard. I've had chittle, haven't had hog deer yet, but I've heard that's top of the Australian species. What's your thoughts on that?
Hog deer are really tasty deer. I find them quite good to eat, although I think fallow deer from South Australia, some of the fallow we've had off improved pasture in South Australia are pretty hard to beat too. There's some really good eating.
Off of those loosened paddocks around Water Valley there, yeah.
Yeah, they go pretty well.
They do. They get nice and fat. This year's going to be an incredible year throughout South Australia. There's still green patches of grass around everywhere, so I'm keen to see what pops around in the Adelaide Hills. There's some nice fat juicy deer getting around, so should have some good antler growth too.
Yeah, awesome. And we've seeing the same in hog deer range. We're coming off three really, really good years. Very wet, heaps of growth. All the deer we're seeing are in just excellent body condition, so it's about as good as it gets. It'll be more challenging hunting probably because of some of that growth and because there's water everywhere, but the condition of the animals is fantastic. That's
great to hear. So why do you feel hog deer are treated differently to other deer species in Australia, with having a season, a tag system, and then the ballot?
It's been hard fought and protected by hunters and hunting organisations, and it's because they're so it's such a discrete population, so special internationally. It's, as you said, it's the only huntable wild population of hog deer in the world. So hunters have really fought to protect them, even as far as when every other deer species was unprotected on public land in Victoria back in 2014. Hog deer were the only ones not to be. And that was because of the hunting community saying, hey, well, look, we really value these deer. They would be quite vulnerable to heavy over-harvesting. And their impacts comparative to other deer species, their agricultural impacts are beyond benign. You wouldn't know they're there unless they're there in some sorts of ridiculous numbers. So there's no good rationale for treating them any other way except for this ideology that says if you're not native to this country, you must go.
Yeah, that one's a tough subject. My biologist friend that I spoke about before, we're about to do a podcast on breaking down deer species in Australia and impacts and stuff like that. Me arguing on the hunter side of stuff, him arguing on the biology and environmental side of stuff. So it should be an interesting podcast, and breaking down the Invasive Council's National Deer Plan as well. So.
Yeah, look, I could go on about that all night, but we'd get sidetracked. But I suppose my take-home on that is that it really ought to be the impacts that matter. If you're really interested in environmental outcomes, then it shouldn't matter if it's a native or an introduced species. What really matters is their impacts and the deer damage relationship. How many deer are causing the desirable impact, how many we need to remove, and the same goes with kangaroos or anything that's causing an impact.
Exactly.
It really ought to be the impacts that matter, and I think we get too hung up on this animal's good, this animal's bad because of who its great-grandparents were.
Yeah, native versus introduced. But yeah, that's something we could definitely go on all night about. How long has the how did the ballot start, and how long has it been running for?
All right, bit of a potted history. There was the then Victorian Department of Natural Resources and Environment, or Conservation, Forest and Land, whatever they were called at the time. It changes names quite often, that department. They had a deer advisory committee. It was a different time when deer were a protected and valued species, even for public land managers. So back in 1982, they had a deer advisory committee, and a fellow named David Young, who actually worked for the department down in Bairnsdale, made a recommendation to that committee that they rehabilitate a very small population of hog deer at the Blond Bay State Game Reserve. So Blond Bay is about 2,000 hectares of former farmland. It's on the northern shore of Lake Victoria in the Gippsland Lakes, about 20 kilometres southwest of Bairnsdale. For people who know Gippsland, a lot of people would have driven through Gippsland and not known Blond Bay was there. Anyway, David recommended to the advisory committee that they look at rehabilitating that hog deer herd. It went no further with the department, stalled till about 1984, and David managed to rally local hunters in East Gippsland and got it financed jointly between the ADA and the SSAA Deer Stalkers Club to do some rehabilitation work on the deer. The Victorian government had a sanctuary at Serendip, which is to the west of Melbourne, between Melbourne and Geelong. So they managed to get 6 hinds and 15 stags from there and bring them to a pen to acclimatise them to the reserve. They went over to Snake Island and tried to capture deer. They had a permit to get 10 hinds and 2 stags in early 1985, but were not successful in capturing them. And then they approached Sunday Island, Para Park, who agreed to come to the party, and they got 4 hinds and 2 stags in 85, 10 hinds in 86, and 9 hinds and a stag in 1987, and that formed the nucleus of there'd been a tiny population in that area, but that formed the nucleus of the rebirthing of hog deer around Blond Bay. So also in 87, the Blond Bay Hog Deer Advisory Group was formed with a view to opening up that deer herd for balloted hunting.
That's awesome. It sounds like it's got a rich conservation history, and a lot of hard work's gone into it. I could imagine catching them wouldn't be the easiest of tasks, let alone finding them to catch them.
Yeah, I've been involved in some chemical capture stuff with sambar and fallow deer, and it's pretty full on. I've been involved in some calf capture with hog deer with young calves, but capturing the mature ones. They end up using what was called a clover trap, so capturing them into cages by feeding them in, and got the deer they needed. But yeah, it was no mean feat.
No, that's awesome. It's definitely got such a rich history. How did they get over to Snake Island? Because you mentioned there that they were already on there when they set up the Blond Bay ballot.
Yeah, the original release was in Corner Inlet, Opossum Creek, which is sort of on the mainland, I suppose, in between Wilson's Promontory, Snake Island and Sunday Island. So the original release of deer was there, and whether they just travelled there at low tide, hog deer can swim reasonably well. They've been known to certainly move between islands. We do a capture and tag program on Sunday Island, and we've had one of our deer show up hit by a car at San Remo, which is 100 odd kilometres away down near Phillip Island.
Yeah, wow.
So they can travel around a bit. So I'm pretty sure it was just sort of a bit of natural migration happened around Corner Inlet, and they got themselves onto Snake and Sunday and throughout that area. That's
awesome. Yeah, I've heard stories of them swim back across between Snake Island and Port Welshpool. You know, people out in a boat seeing a deer swimming across and stuff like that.
It's quite certainly between Port Welshpool and Snake Island. When you're on there, you'll probably encounter the cattle. So the Snake Island cattlemen swim cattle across from Port Welshpool. At low tide, when there's the wind blowing the right way, it's quite a small channel and not a big swim. So they swim their cattle across and graze them on the island seasonally. So it's not that difficult for an animal to get its way across there.
Beautiful, yeah. That's I didn't realise they grazed over there, but makes sense with the amount of water troughs and that around there. So
Yeah, and if you look at some of those bigger, more open places, Cow Flat, Rifle Range, Big Hole, it's a good thing that they do graze cattle on there. It keeps some of those really nice big open plains open, which certainly helps us with the hog deer.
Yeah, very nice. I've been studying where I've got to hunt. And I got a sent a map from one of my mates. So I was looking at Bullock Waterhole for
Yeah.
giving it a shot. So
I know people have been quite successful on Bullock. So
yeah, beautiful. Any hunting advice? Heard.
Get elevated and stay put. Is the way to hunt hog deer, is to get yourself some height, and get yourself hooked in for the long haul. So get into your position, get the wind in your favour in your position, and just stay there and wait for them.
Yeah, beautiful. I've got a stand currently being built at the moment. I just had some photos of it sent through just before we started the podcast, so it's all becoming real now. I'm getting real excited. How many people apply every year, and how many people are drawn?
It varies from year to year, but usually around a couple of thousand people apply. We have 8 periods of 7 hunters get drawn for Snake Island, and then 30 emergencies, I think it is. And then Blond Bay and Bull Pool, we have 2 periods of 4 hunters each on those places. So, and then a pool of emergencies. So there's 100 and something people get drawn. So maybe about a 1 in 20 chance of coming out of the barrel on any given ballot night.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot more than I thought. I don't know why I had about 70 in my head plus emergencies all up, but yeah, that's definitely some good chances to get out there though. That's for sure.
But not that many get drawn period 2 Snake Island. So
yeah, I heard that's a bit of an arsey one to draw. That's for sure. I had one of the guys I know. He drew as an emergency 2 years ago. For period 2, so he's given me some good advice, and then he's drawn for period 1 this year. So,
excellent.
Not many people get to hunt it, 2 times in 3 years, which is just insane. What does the future of hog deer hunting look like?
Hopefully, really good. There's constant pressure from the government, and this. We're forever pushing to keep them as a game animal and to keep that level of protection up. And again, that's not predicated on impacts. That's not people saying, "Hey, there's a real problem with hog deer." It's a real ideological position getting pushed. But beyond that, hopefully, pretty good. There's good areas of public land, probably better public land than there's ever been, or than there has been for a long time, for hog deer hunting. And then there's private landholders and a few more coming on board that are managing them for paid hunting.
Yep.
Which is very much the future, whether it be that, the model of the big safari hunt or people paying for access. But it's always been a sort of bespoke, I suppose, sort of pursuit. There's about 1,000 sets of tags go out every year and about a 10% success rate on those tags. So there's not a heap of hog deer get killed every year. We probably kill more on Sunday Island than get killed under the tag system on the mainland.
Yeah, well, that's crazy. With the tag system, anyone can apply for them, and then do you still have to send them back at the end of April? Because
you do just a return online now.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, they've finally got a pretty good online licensing system in Victoria. So if you've got your game license, you can apply for your tags online. They'll get sent out to you, and if you don't use them, or even if you do use them, but if you don't use them, you just fill in your return online, and that means that those tag numbers are accounted for, so that if they show up at a taxidermist and they haven't been through a checking station, someone's going to be in trouble. So those deer can still be accounted for. But yeah, you don't have to go through the rigmarole of posting them back anymore.
Okay, that's good to hear. Just on that, what's the difference between free-range hog deer and high-fence hog deer hunting in Victoria? Do you still need a tag for those high-fence ones, and can?
Yeah, well, the high fence stuff's technically not legal at all.
Okay.
So it happens, it goes on, and good luck to people. But yeah, those deer would still need to be tagged.
Yep.
There are private properties that operate under extended season permits, so they're allowed to operate. The main hog deer season is in April. So if you've got a bit of private that you like to hunt or some public that you hunt, for most hog deer hunters, it's in April. But there are private properties that the government's acknowledged they're managing hog deer for income, and have given them an extended season to enable them to do that. Okay. So they put in a game management plan. They show that their offtake's going to be sustainable, and then they can take hog deer for an extra month or an extra 2 months. And then on Sunday Island, we've got a different setup again, just because of the nature of what that cooperative is and how many deer we've got to take every year just to keep our island from getting eaten out.
Yep. So with the hog deer season, why is it April? So from my understanding, their main rut is towards the start of Feb, about now.
Yeah, sort of clouded in history, but I think a part of it was to avoid the main rut, was to make sure that the deer aren't too vulnerable. They're certainly, the boys are up and moving and a bit ruddy now. Hog deer don't have a rut as such, but there's certainly a lot of mating activity at the moment. It's peak breeding. But my understanding is that it was set at April so that you'd still get deer that were in hard antler, that were in good condition, so before their antler drop, but you're avoiding them being super vulnerable during that peak mating season.
Okay, beautiful. What was I going to ask? I had another question lined up. Checking in. What type of measurements and stuff do they take when you check them in? Because you've got, a 24-hour period to get them checked in?
Yeah. So they take they weigh the deer gutted, and then take length measurements, take a measurement around the chest. So they take a length with and without tail, take a height measurement of the deer. They will take a jawbone from the deer so that they can age it. They're the main measurements that get taken. If it's a female deer, they'll check for reproductive conditions. So see if there's a fetus in there, which basically if you shoot a female hog deer, I'd be very surprised if there's not a fetus in there. They will join almost as soon as they calve. And most people who don't find a fetus when they shoot a female hog deer, it's because they haven't looked hard enough. It might just be a small embryo or something, but you'll typically find one there. And that's a really good way of making sure that the breeding population's good. You know, if your breeding rate was to get below 90%, say, you'd start to be a bit worried about something else going on.
Yeah. What about inbreeding on Sunday Island and Snake Island and those island areas?
Look, it is a concern. The genetic stuff we understand, and looking at jawbones, there's a deformity in our deer where I'm not sure the exact tooth, but there's a missing molar on one jawbone that seems to come out, and that's proof of really tight genetic inbreeding, I suppose. You start with a very small population to begin with, and the fear is that could present as a more serious genetic disease. The inbreeding's a real concern, particularly on those island systems. And really, the only way to ensure against it is to carry as many deer as you can. So,
is there any steps being introduced to introduce new bloodlines in, or different bloodlines in from other areas? The political climate we're in, the government just would never allow such a thing. I mean, logically, that's what should happen, is that we introduce some new blood. But the problem, from my understanding, seems to happen when it's grandfather breeding over grandchild, okay,
or some such thing as that. And like I said, probably the best insurance against that is to carry a big population, which reduces the likelihood of those sorts of breeding events happening. It doesn't mean they won't happen, but it means they happen far less often when there's more options for the deer to breed.
So what about age-wise, what's the typical age of stags being taken during the ballot?
I haven't got the data on the typical age. Sort of your peak deer are about 5 years old, 5 to 8.
Okay.
But it really depends on the hunters in any given year. Most of the Snake Island ones have been taking reasonably mature deer, but it's public land, and more importantly, it's up to the hunter. It's hunter's choice. It really is their deer, and if they've never taken a hog deer before, or they'd be happy with a representative 6-point stag that might be 10 inches, then good luck to them and really happy for them. The trophy's in the eye of the beholder. I know other guys who have gone over there who, they're not coming home with anything less than sort of 14 inch because they've already got better hog deer than that, and that's what they're after. So I couldn't answer exactly the average age, but if you're looking for a trophy class animal, you're looking for sort of 5 years plus.
So yeah, having never hunted hog deer before, for myself, I know it's hunting, but what would be a typical stag you're looking for if you want to take something somewhat decent? What would you be looking for in characteristics?
13 inches plus. So probably a good rule of thumb is the length of the face. So from the tip of the nose through to the middle of the head's about 12 inches.
Okay.
So you're looking for antlers that are bigger than that are bigger than the face. If you're seeing a deer that's antlers look obviously longer than its face, you're looking at a trophy class animal.
Okay, awesome. And then do they come out as spikes like normal deer? They'll come out as a spike and then a fork and...
Yeah. They'll be spikies and then a forky sort of first head and then grow. Yeah, it's sort of probably 5 years before they start getting into their prime. And yeah, they'll develop like any other deer species through those things, and then they'll go backwards too. So, and again, the trophy's in the eye of the beholder. I had a mate shot on his private property, a real old warrior going backwards with a bit of gnarly stuff going on for his growth. Actually scored well because he was a really big deer, but non-typical. And there's a lot of non-typical fallow. There's fallow with extra points and some gnarly stuff going on, which are really cool trophies, but different strokes for different folks. It depends what you're after.
Yeah, there was that cool handlebar hoggy taken last year or the year before. With the bow. Yeah. That thing was incredible.
We had an American biologist out with us a few years ago, hunted hog deer and took a really good one on private, 16-inch, really nice deer. I caught up with him in Melbourne the next day having a whiskey, and all he wanted to show me was the jawbone. He was this guy's an expert on whitetail deer and always into aging the deer. And I'm just looking at it going, Craig, these antlers are unreal. And he's, check the jawbone, check how wore down these teeth are. Like, this is... he was excited because he just shot a deer that had done everything it was going to do and was coming out of its prime. And to him, that's the massive trophy, is to shoot an old deer.
Yeah, that's that North American model of conservation. The older the deer, past breeding prime, that's how all their scoring systems were set up. So, yeah,
and I was, to be honest, far more interested in the antlers than I was in the jawbone.
I'm just keen to hopefully get that first of a species, that's for sure. Speaking of North America, with the whole ballot system being, one entry per person every year, what do you think of the North American tagging, the ballot systems they have over there, where there's bonus points and stuff like that? So you put in 2 years in a row, you might get an extra point if you put in every year consistently type thing. And the more you put in, the more times your name's in the hat.
Yeah, pros and cons. I suppose from our perspective, the first thing is we're all volunteers, so we keep it really simple.
Yeah.
One person, one entry. I can certainly see pros in that American point system, but you also hear of it becoming a bit of an arms race, and you might have 20 entries in the draw, but unless you got 30 in, you're not in the race. And so it could be a good thing, I suppose. But yeah, from our perspective, we've got a really simple system. It's fair in that everyone who enters in a given year has exactly the same chance of coming out.
No, it's good. It's definitely good to watch. I think I put in 5 or 6 years. I think it might be 6 years, but 1 year I didn't get my patch, so I think I've only got the 5 patches. So, what do you look for when you're setting up for a hog deer spot over there?
You're looking for the deer to feel safe. So they're a cud chewing animal like any other. They're gonna come out and have a feed, and they're going to come out and get some water. Particularly the time of year you're going to hunt them on the coast there. It's not that we've had a super hot summer, but it's still pretty warm and they're long days. But they're not just going to walk out to water in the. Well, I mean, you can't say that with deer because everything you say they're not going to do. That's exactly what a deer will turn around and do. But typically, hog deer are really flighty and they want to feel safe. So you're looking at a place where they've got cover on 3 sides or where they can walk out and have a good escape path. They're deer from the subcontinent, so they're a really small deer that was hunted by Indian wild dogs and Bengal tigers in their native habitat. So they're super prey, and yeah, just looking for somewhere where you can get some elevation, I suppose, so that you can see them and get that wind running underneath you so they can't smell you and they feel safe.
What's the winds like on like Snake Island over there? Does it vary much, or is it just...
No, you tend to get the wind blowing reasonably stiff from one direction. And it can be a real problem in that you'll get days and days of really strong wind sometimes. This time of year you might get 3 days of 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometre an hour easterlies, which is pretty shit house, and the deer don't like it either. They're not coming out when the wind's like that. They, like all deer species, they really hate the wind. They'll stay in the lee side of it, and they'll get their food close to cover and just wait it out. So, but yeah, typically it's not super swirly, the wind there.
That's good. What about like patterning the deer? Are they a very routine animal, or are they just...
No, not really. They'll, other than that you can rely on them to come to water and to come and eat, but no, they're not going to come to the same place every day and do the same thing. Yeah, hog deer are pretty not dissimilar to sambar, sort of in their behaviour in that way.
And that would be getting chased by tigers and stuff over on in the Indian region.
You don't want to give your predator a heads up like that.
Yeah, exactly. So something I didn't realise until after I drew for Snake Island was getting over there. So there's a couple different ways you can get yourself over there. I heard the Coast Guard will take you over there for a fee and pick you up as well. Speaking of high winds and stuff, any recommendations on getting over there safely?
Yeah, if you're not a really experienced boatie, then definitely get a lift with someone who is, or lash out and there's a few different operators, Coast Guard and some local fishermen who will take people over and pick them up. It's water that can change really, really quickly. It can go from super smooth to super rough, and it's really tidal. Like the tidal influence there is huge. So Sunday Island, for example, we've got a jetty on the island that's 490 metres long, and in a given day you can have water lapping that jetty at high tide so that you can bring a big boat, and I mean a big boat, right up to the shore, to low tide where you can't even get a boat to the end of the jetty.
Yeah, well, that's...
So, it's very, very heavily tidal. So unless you're good with a boat and experienced with a boat, I wouldn't suggest taking a boat over there. I'd suggest finding someone in your period who's going to run their boat, or using one of those other services.
So what about anchoring up on the island? Just say you take a tinny over there. Can you just kind of like pull it up on the beach anywhere above high tide?
Yeah. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can anchor up at high tide. And yeah, even in a big boat, you can anchor up on high tide if you set your anchor right, just the one anchor, because you don't want your boat getting picked up and swamped. You don't want the water pulling it up and swamping it. Or there's places like the Gulf where you could sneak particularly a small boat. You can sneak it a fair way up the Gulf, and it'd be quite safe and out of the main body of water. The trap with that is, again, very tidal. You need a good high tide to then get it out, and the tide heights change there considerably from day to day. So it'll come down to looking at your tide charts and making sure that the tide that you got it in on, there's going to be a big enough tide 3 or 4 days later to get the boat back out.
Okay. So how far is it from Port Welshpool across to Snake Island? What's the rough, if you're going, say, straight across from Port Welshpool to Snake Island?
10 minutes by boat if the going's good and you're barreled over sort of from Port Welshpool to the Swashway, which is on that western end. It'd be 10 minutes by boat. It's not far, and probably 20, 25 from Port Albert to the other end of the island.
Okay, yeah.
So in good conditions, it's a very easy boat ride.
Where's best to launch from? I've heard some people say Port Welshpool's better, some people say Port Albert's better.
Depends which end of the island you want to hunt on, I suppose. And where you want to get into. Port Welshpool's the bigger of the fishing ports. It's probably more sheltered getting over there, but it really depends which end of the island you want to be on. If you want to be hunting on that eastern end of the island, then going out from Port Albert's probably best, but that water can get really rough too.
And what about parking cars? So you park your car, because I'm guessing you're leaving it in either Port Welshpool or Port Alberton at the boat ramps or whatever. What's the security like and safety for people leaving their cars over there for a week?
Welshpool's got cameras at the boat ramp. It's okay. Port Albert has a really good park at the boat ramp where there's free camping for camper vans and caravans. So there's always grey nomads in that car park, sort of camping out for the week or for a few days. And I'd say Port Albert's probably the more secure of the two.
And what about parking? Is there like parking? Do you have to pay for parking for while you're over there, or is it all free parking?
It's all free parking at those big ramps. It's just a matter of which one you feel safer at, and you might be able to talk to. Certainly, if you're getting a lift with one of those boat services, they'll probably tee you up with a car park that's a bit more secure again.
Do you have any recommendations for some of these boat services that offer it? So I know that I heard that the Coast Guard takes a fee for taking you over there and picking you up. But what are the other?
Look, that's probably a really good option. Particularly the Port Albert Coast Guard. He's a guy who's got a commercial fishing license, knows the waters back to front. I heard he doesn't miss you with the fee, but
that was my next thing. I heard it's pretty steep,
but very reliable and will get you where you want to be on and off in most weather.
What about like phone coverage over on the island, like contacting these services while you're over on the island to get you back? Because
there's Telstra service around the coast. There's bits of the island that aren't great, but you can normally get Telstra service around the coast.
Yeah, no worries. I'll be taking an inReach over with me, so one of the Garmin satellite inReaches.
And the other thing for hunters on the island to do is to stay in touch with their checking station operator. And if you're going to get any taxidermy done local, stay in touch with your taxidermist too. Those guys will want to show up and get a full body mount done or something. You don't want to just be lumping on your taxidermist door in the morning and saying, here's a deer for a full body mount, because they're going to have to block 6 or 7 hours out of their day to accommodate you then. So, but certainly staying in touch with your checking station operator. You've got till the Friday to get off the island with your deer if you need to, but they're not going to pin you to that if the weather's bad. We'd far rather people get off safely then get off on some prescribed time frame. It'll be a pain and it'll put them out, but if you let them know, hey, the weather's just too bad, I can't get a boat off, they're not going to ping you for it. And by the same token, most of the checking station operators are pretty flexible. If you're getting off at 9 o'clock at night, they might come and check your deer for you if you've let them know as soon as you shot it and told them what the state of play is, rather than make you wait around until the next morning.
So how far is the checking station from Snake Island?
It's in Port Welshpool.
Okay, yeah.
At the ferry terminal, so right where you do your briefing, right near the boat ramp.
Yeah, beautiful. So is it, I heard there's also a form that you can get, if you get stuck over there, to cape the deer if need be while you're over there.
Yeah, there's a form to dismember. You've got to get it before you go, is the catch with that. So if it's at all in your mind that that's what you might be doing, get the form.
Yeah. And that's during the briefing.
You don't have to do it, but then you've covered yourself.
And that's during the briefing. You can get that and reach out.
Yeah, you've probably already been in touch with a guy from GMA, so I'd let him know as soon as you can that that's what you're looking at doing.
Yep. Okay. No worries. Yeah, I had one of the guys in my period reach out and ask about that, and GMA ran him around a little bit because they didn't know anything about it. But then he found the right guy, so. So, getting towards the end of the questions on hog deer and stuff like that. One more I can think of. So you said you got to Friday to get off the island. How do you go about keeping meat? Because I'm assuming that February period's pretty warm while you're over there. You got any advice for keeping meat without it spoiling while you're over there until you get off?
Certainly in those conditions, depending on where you're camping, of course, and how much you're carrying, how light you're going, but meat bags at a minimum is the must. So, a calico meat bag or something breathable. If you can get one of those Stony Creek meat safes or something like that, they're a really good thing to get some airflow around them, and just set up with somewhere where you can get that deer hanging, getting plenty of air around it. It'll be all right, but I'd be more worried in that hot weather about cape slip.
Yeah.
The meat loss, as long as you prepare the deer right, as long as you gut it and get all that stuff that's going to taint your meat out and get some airflow around it, it'll be all right. Probably the big thing worried about, particularly on Snake Island, but in all those places, is stuff that's going to bite you. Protecting yourself from sand flies, because they'll really monster you. More so than snakes, you certainly want some snake bite bandage just in case, but the likelihood of getting bitten by a snake is very low. The likelihood of getting bitten by sandflies is incredibly high.
Yeah, I heard it's pretty bad for sandflies and mosquitoes over there. Any advice for tackling them for people that aren't used for them? Off Bushman's, and anything you recommend? Yeah,
Bushman's with the DEET's typically the best thing.
Yeah.
Even if you use some sort of scent blocker, a bit of eucalyptus oil or tea tree oil or something as a scent blocker on you, but that's why it's important to get yourself up high and knock that scent bit out of the equation. And long sleeves, long pants. Tuck your pants into your socks if you need to, or have your gaiters on. But regardless of how hot it is, get your arms and your legs covered up. Get as covered up as you can be. The cream DEET tends to work really well in my view. Spray can be hit and miss, and the other problem with spray, if you're up in your high seat, you're spraying scent around everywhere, making noise, spraying the stuff around, whereas the cream stuff's nice and quiet. It only goes where you put it.
Okay, yeah, no, that's some great advice there for sure. So snake gators, you reckon are a must as well over there with a name like Snake Island?
It's actually called Snake Island because of its shape. Its legal name is Latrobe Island. It's called Snake Island because it's shaped like a snake, but it's also got a heap of snakes on it. So,
so what snakes are over there? Do you know? Is it like tiger snakes and?
Yeah, a lot of tigers.
Yeah.
I think there's red bellies and stuff like that, but what I've seen there's been tigers. What we typically see on Sunday Island, which is just across from it, is a lot of big tiger snakes.
Yeah, awesome. I like snakes, so they don't tend to worry me too much. So the
they're really cool, and like I said, the chance of being bitten by them is incredibly low. The consequence of being bitten by them, though, is pretty severe. So
yeah, exactly. So just keep all your snake bandages, your first aid kit up to kit, and make sure you got some gaiters and stuff.
Yeah, and just be mindful. You don't want to scare people off, but it's just because you're on an island and it's close to society. It's a real wilderness hunt. Help could be a long way away. That weather, like if you got 100 km an hour winds, choppers aren't coming in to get you, boats aren't getting over there to get you. So have yourself set up so that you're self-sufficient and that you can get yourself out of trouble as much as possible, because you need to be mindful that help could be a long way away.
What's the go with emergency services heading over there? I heard something about helicopters can't land on the actual island. They have to land on like low water.
Oh, that's for the commercial helicopter operators.
Yep.
But no, the emergency helicopters can do what they want to do. But there's a lot of that island that you wouldn't get a helicopter in. You get them on Cow Swamp or the Big Plain or around the cattlemen's huts. But there's a lot of that island where the scrub just wouldn't allow it. So
yeah, it definitely looks pretty scrubby. What type of heights like is the general scrub at? Is it like 6-7-ish foot or?
It depends on where you are. There's big ridges of manna gum on the northern end. It changes. The vegetation varies so greatly there. It can go from tussock flats to sort of Banksia scrub right up through to manna gum. But your typical stuff, sort of 6 to 8 foot high, I suppose.
And what are the tracks like over there? So I've got the map, and it shows you all these different tracks. Are they reasonably well maintained, or are they? It's pretty tough hike.
The main ones are okay. We were over there 2 years ago on the side by sides and travelled all the main tracks, but with a lot of chainsawing.
Yep.
The tracks on that map that you showed me before that have got dots on them, a lot of them barely exist anymore.
Yep.
So there's a track, for example, out to Eye Swamp, I think it is, that shows on the map from rifle range to Eye, and you wouldn't even know there's a track there to look at it. So they put in there were koalas on Snake Island.
Oh, wow.
Not native to there either. They've been dropped off by rangers over the years and are overpopulated in the manna gums there.
Yep.
And were completely denuding the manna gums. So they ran a sterilisation program for years and years. Classic Australian wildlife management. We can't shoot them because they're koalas. So they spent a fortune pulling them out of the trees, taking them back to a vet station at the huts, sterilising them, putting them back out, and then just stopped. So once they got down to the numbers they wanted, there's no monitoring going on at all. There's still koalas there eating the manna gum. My point there is the tracks were really well maintained for the koala work.
Yep.
But since the koala work finished, parks have not had much of a chance to be on the island and haven't had much budget and haven't been able to keep those tracks up.
What type of speaking of koalas, I didn't know that there was koalas over there. What other type of wildlife are you likely to run into over there?
Urus and wallabies for sure. Foxes.
Oh, wow.
And heaps of bird life. Just teeming with bird life. All sorts of little sort of, antechinus and small mammals. But yeah, your big ones are your urus and wallabies, foxes. There's a fox baiting program still goes on there. And yeah, just the bird life's unreal.
So foxes, do you recommend to shoot them if you see them, or what's the go there?
No, you're only permitted to shoot hog deer.
Okay, yep.
So all of the ballot areas, it's an issue at Blond Bay and Bull Pool that have got a lot of sambar coming in on the ballot areas, and hunters will sit in their stands and see sambar. The permit that's issued to you is a permit to hunt hog deer there and hog deer only. So
okay, cool. That's good to know. So yeah, come to the end of all the hog deer questions that I've thought of. Unless you can think of anything else you want to add for people to to know when they're applying, and if they're drawn and stuff like that?
No, not just to be aware that they really are a quite a different species to hunt. I suppose it's they're a species where people will tell you you can't walk them up, but you can, but don't. The absolute best way, the most successful way to hunt hog deer is to bore yourself shitless, is to get yourself in a tree stand, take a bottle to pee in during the day, take some headphones to listen to some podcasts or something if that's what you want to do, but just prepare yourself. You've got, 4.5 days. It's not very long for the hunt of a lifetime, but you'd be amazed how many people don't stick it out. You'd be amazed how many people get crap weather and leave after 2 days, or so, aren't seeing deer and leave after 2 days.
Yeah, wow.
And the other thing with hog deer is that, if you've got crap weather, hunker down, because once that weather turns good, once that rain stops and that wind drops out, they'll be out. If you can sit there, those coastal areas, you might get 3 days straight of just shit weather, and sitting in a one-man tent by yourself for 3 days straight is mind-numbingly boring. But the opportunity of a lifetime might be 10 minutes away.
Yes, exactly. And you can take a support person over there with you as well.
So they can't hunt, so they can't assist you in the hunt. So they can be with you, but they can't be spotting deer or scouting deer for you. But highly recommend people, if they can, if they've got a mate who's up to going with them, take someone to go with you and help you with the heavy lifting. It's really flat. You look at a contour map of Snake Island, and it's not much, but walk around it for 12 hours and see how buggered you are. It's flat, and carrying deer out there can be hard, and that sand can bog you down. So having someone with you for company, for safety, and for a bit of muscle is highly recommended if you can.
So yeah, on that they can't spot deer, so they can't take binos or anything over there with them because they're not allowed to point out deer.
They can do whatever they want while you're there, but they can't be hunting with you, and hunting, according to Game Management Authority, is anything involved in that pursuit of deer for you. If they wanted to go off somewhere else where there's no other hunters and photograph deer or go fishing, or it's public land, they can do what they want. But yeah, they can't be sitting there with binos spotting deer for you.
Okay, no worries. That's some good information too. It's from what people I've spoken to who have drawn it in the past and drawn it this year. It's quite hard to find bits and pieces of information on the whole ballot thing, what do's and don'ts. Are there any other don'ts that?
No, not off the top of my head. It's really hard trying to say to people, might sound like we're talking it down. Don't take it lightly, but don't be daunted by it either. Most of us can stick out 4.5 days of crap.
Yeah.
And you might get a deer, and it happens, and it happens every year. Guys get a deer in the last 10 minutes of the Friday. The thing materialises. Hunt to the end. And the other bit of advice that Doug Reed gave years and years ago was, when you're heading over there, have in your head what you'd be happy to go home with on the Friday afternoon. And if that thing presents itself first thing on Monday morning, put a bullet into it.
Yeah, don't pass. don't pass on the first day what you'd shoot on the last day.
Have in your head what you'd be happy, but have in your head what, if it came to Friday afternoon, what you'd be happy to take home, and take that home if the opportunity presents.
No, that's some solid advice there. So a quick couple for you. What's your best hunting story off the top of your head?
I think I might have told this one on a podcast before. It was as a young bloke hunting sambar, and it was the day when it all came together for me. So I'd been hunting for a couple of years. I was lucky enough to shoot a deer the first time I carried a rifle in the bush. And that was just because good blokes had put me in a good spot. And I thought I was pretty good having done that. And then I spent a couple more years hunting and really just fumbling along, not knowing what I was doing, not having a formal education in deer hunting or having come up with it. And I was hunting one day and got in my spot and read everything right. I sat in my spot and I thought, the wind's coming from here. I need to be in a position out of the wind. The deer could come from these directions. These are the positions I need to be in. This is how cool I need to be when I take the shot, and this is the breathing I need to do. And it was after a few years of hunting and some success, and I think it was only a small spiker that I shot, but it was probably the most satisfying deer I'd shot, because it was the first time that I really felt like I'd done everything right to make it happen. It was, you make your own luck as a hunter, and a fair part of the luck is showing up. But this was a deer I got by doing those other things as a hunter that make you get a deer, by reading the wind, by actually applying some skill to it, rather than just being a lucky bloke in the right spot and shooting a thing that came past.
Yeah, that's awesome. From people looking into hunting from the outside, they don't see what actually goes into taking a deer or taking an animal of any sort. Just the countless hours that you spend out there chasing stuff and putting time in, patterning and learning, and just every time, like, even I've been hunting since I was pretty young with my pop, and every single time I go out, and especially if I go out with someone else, whether they're new to it or been hunting for years, you're always picking up little tips and pieces that you didn't think of.
Yeah, and it's really cool when things just click. When you're doing something and something new occurs to you, go, well, I'd never thought of it that way, but I'll never think of it the other way again. I don't know if you know Peter Burke, who's quite a famous sambar hunter here in Victoria, one of the old school guys. But Burkey does the ADA hunter education course every year. Does a great talk, but after 60 years or whatever it is of hunting sambar, and he hunts them every day, Berkey says the first thing he does when he walks out of the bush every day is says, okay, what did I learn today?
Yeah, that's just hunting any deer species. It's everything's constantly changing. You just can't fully pattern them.
No, then we wouldn't love them if you could.
Yeah, 100%. It's not an easy thing to do, and that's why we like being out there suffering.
Yeah.
So, how do you see the public views on hunting?
It's really interesting, and being in a job where I sort of cover more than deer now, it's quite interesting. So seeing this public differentiate between hunting ducks and hunting deer, for example, it depends on who's hunting and what they're hunting, which is completely illogical if you think about it. But the public sees a farmer shooting rabbits as perfectly okay, sees a hunter shooting deer as less okay, and sees a hunter shooting ducks as even less okay. It's something that's changing, certainly changing where you are in South Australia, as you've seen in recent years, and changing really quickly here in Victoria.
Yeah. As
we get this more urbanised society, we see the public view on what we do switching against us, our social licence under challenge. But on the flip side, you see this wild food movement taking off, and it actually being a bit hipster and a bit cool to consume wild game and to hunt wild game. So I see the public view is a bit confused, I suppose, but I think for the most part they'll tolerate us if what we're doing is humane. If we can demonstrate that what we're doing is sustainable and humane, I think for the most part, I don't think the public's ever going to en masse love us, but I think for the most part they'll tolerate us if we can demonstrate that.
Yeah, it's funny for the most part. If you're talking to someone and you go, how do you feel about hunting? Their first thing will be like, as long as it's not trophy hunting, it's okay. As long as it's pest management or something like that, or if you're only hunting for meat, that's fine. And then you start breaking it down. Are you fine with this? And yeah, I'm fine with that. Are you fine with this? Oh, no, I don't like duck hunting. But then you break down like the food aspect and the conservation aspect sides of things, and they're like, oh, okay, I didn't think of it like that. That's not what the mainstream media portrays, or any of these lobbyist groups that are out there that are constantly attacking duck hunting.
Yeah, and it's very much a human value we put on it. I don't think the quarry cares particularly what we think of it. I don't. It's a distinction that we make as humans and as a society about, like I said, this. Deer are bad, and the conversation you're having with your mate, the biologist, well, deer are bad because they're an exotic, and kangaroos are good because they're a native. I don't think that the plant species that are being damaged by either of those things really care if it's a native or an exotic eating them. I think the impacts are just the same. It's a weird way that society thinks about what we do.
Yeah, we're having a funny chat about it, him and I, the other day, and he's like, deer damage trees, big trees, all of this stuff. I'm like, I haven't seen too many, larger trees killed by a deer. I've seen plenty of saplings, shredded by deer. And he's like, nah, they destroy Aboriginal heritage sites by rubbing on, scar trees and stuff like that. I'm like, I've seen more cockatoos kill bigger gum trees than I've ever seen deer kill larger gum trees. And he's like, you got me there.
It's an interesting one that really comes to head for me when you go to Wilson's Promontory, which is just to the west of where you'll be hunting on Snake Island. I think it's Australia's second oldest national park. Beautiful place. And there's just come off the back of a massive campaign of culling hog deer on the prom, aerial culling, the works, like really decimated the population of hog deer there. And the rationale that was being given for it is, all the same stuff. They damage Aboriginal shell middens, they damage native vegetation, erosion, your classic, these are the negative impacts we can't live with. What's really funny about it on the prom is that the deer were introduced there in 1865 or thereabouts. The kangaroos were introduced to the prom in 1910.
Oh, wow.
By the same people, by the Acclimatisation Society. There's no fossil records, no biological history of kangaroos having ever been on Wilson's Promontory. And massive damage to plant communities, huge population of roos, massive damage. Wombats were introduced there in 1910, and I've got video of them digging up shell middens. Yet there's no mention of the overabundant kangaroos and the overabundant wombats and all this terrible damage they're doing. There's no aerial culling program. You can walk into the Parks Victoria gift shop at Tidal River and buy teddy bears of the kangaroos and the wombats. The rationale for removing the hog deer is that they're this terrible introduced species that's doing all this damage. They've been there for 50 years longer than the kangaroos and the wombats have.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. I'm definitely keen to look more into that, that's for sure. And I know Dan, the biologist, he'll hear this when it's out and be pretty keen to look into that and find any rebuttal he can try and find on it.
Well, yeah, and look, I hope it's not a rebuttal, and these things are complex. The conversations about deer are complex, and I've come off spending a long time in the Deer Association that's gone from literally arguing that basically deer have no impact or their impact's completely benign, which is just not true. But the reverse is just as untrue. The reverse, that all deer everywhere are these terribly destructive things, is also untrue. And I really hope that we'll reach a point where we can embrace the nuance in the conversation and deal with these things in with a bit more clear heads and based on the impacts rather than taking these ideological viewpoints.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard one. It's a battle I find myself thinking about all the time is, I grew up loving conservation type of stuff, I wanted to be a park ranger growing up as a kid, Steve Irwin was my idol. Sit down watching all these David Attenborough documentaries on everything, learning everything I could about animals, And then I've been hunting ever since I was a young kid. So like explaining to people I can still love animals but hunt them at the same time. But then when I started deer hunting, you're getting all these people going, deer are bad, deer are this, they're doing that. And it's just like, I wouldn't want the landscape without deer. If I had a one magic wish and it was like, wipe out all deer off of Australia or wipe out all kangaroos off of Australia, I would go kangaroos in a heartbeat, just gone. Deer have such more of a special place in my heart than most of our native animals do. I wouldn't be who I am today without having deer around.
And there's something, I suppose you think similarly to I do, but there's just something captivating about deer. There's they've captured human imagination through time. There's just something about that animal. There's cave drawings in the Kimberley that predate European settlement by 20,000 years or something of rooster deer.
Oh wow!
So Indigenous Australians or Malaccan traders or someone who's been up through Papua New Guinea and made their way into Australia tens of thousands of years before Europeans got here. They get to a cave in the Kimberley far from where a deer's ever been, and they draw deer on the wall.
That's incredible. I'm gonna have to definitely look into that. I haven't heard about that before either. So I'm learning lots of interesting stuff. I want to go read into now.
Cool.
So how would you change the public views on hunting and hunters, and what can hunters do to change the views on themselves?
I think all hunters can be ambassadors for hunting. I think the real basic stuff, and it's probably not as prevalent where you are in South Oz, but where we are, it's a constant of cover up a deer if you're carrying it home on the back of your ute from up the bush. Don't have it sticking out for everyone on the freeway to see, and engage in that venison diplomacy. If you work in a workplace with people who aren't exposed to hunting, give them some sausages, give them some really nice entry-level venison that everyone can eat, sausage rolls or pies, or engage in that venison diplomacy, show people that what we do is something that we get an awful lot out of and that we get food out of, and just be a decent person. When you talk about hunting, don't badger people, don't call them the worst thing. It's a trap I fell into when I was young. I think a lot of guys do is call anyone who eats meat who doesn't like hunting a hypocrite and badger them. Makes you feel good, but it certainly doesn't change their minds.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a hard one because, as hunters in Australia, we seem to be in this defense mode constantly. It constantly seems like we have to have our backs up against the wall, and it's just constant defending everything that we do as hunters and fighting for who we want. So it is hard on that aspect to, be civil with some people when you hear the same thing over and over and over from multiple different people, but that, each time someone new says it to you, they haven't heard your side yet properly. So if you lash out at them and attack them straight away, that's what they're going to think hunters are like. I've been guilty of it in the past, as you said, we all probably have, especially with social media, but you made a good point with the venison diplomacy there. Every place I've worked, I've always, especially April, I'm bringing bags of mince in for everyone to take home. I'm cooking steaks up on the barbecue for everyone for lunch. I've had the office ladies at my work eating venison heart and trying kidney and liver and stuff like that. So I think that's really all we can do, and be an ethical hunter in the bush, be safe, be humane. Certainly if you're hunting public land, always have it in your mind that it's public land, it belongs to everyone and everyone deserves to enjoy it, even if they don't feel the same way about you. That's something I'm definitely jealous of, is the Victorian model of public land. Like, every South Australian hunter wishes we had something like that. It's just an incredible opportunity and that you guys have over there, like the way you guys manage deer. Yes, I know you have helicopter culling and stuff like that. We all hate it. But the fact that you're allowed on public land to go chase them, for a small fee a year, you can go shoot the third largest deer species in the world and take home as much meat as you want.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it really is hunter's paradise.
It is hunters and fishers paradise. Your whole licensing system for fishing as well is just incredible. South Australians.
You guys have got. You guys think that the snapper that we keep are too small there. You think they're pinkies and you throw them away. You guys got some pretty cool fish.
We're not allowed to catch them. They've just put another ban in place for another 3.5 years, unfortunately. So that's 7 years in South Australia without snapper fishing.
I didn't mean to rub it in, my apologies.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. It's one of those things, when greenies and animal welfare people and then biologists and fishermen and commercial fishermen, it's just one of those deep rabbit holes that we want to avoid right now.
Yeah.
So what is hunting to you?
It's a way of life, I suppose. It sounds a bit trite, but it's something that's really encompassed my life in ways I never thought it would when I just got into hunting as a young bloke as a thing to do on the weekends. It's become the focus of much of my adult life, advocating for hunters and working with deer and deer management. And I can't really explain it. And I think that's probably part of the beauty of hunting is that it's got this intangible benefit. Yeah. But it's a real connection with nature and a connection with the land in a way that nothing else, hunting and fishing, give you that in a way that nothing else I've experienced does.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's why that's one of my favorite questions on the podcast, because the way everyone describes it is all different but the same, and I can relate to it all. You got some kids?
I've got a 9-year-old boy wandering around here somewhere who probably should be in bed, yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to take him out with you? I'm not 100% sure what the law is over in Victoria.
He can't shoot till he's 12.
Yep.
But yeah, he certainly comes out. He spends as a family, we're involved in Sunday Island, so he spends an awful lot of his life involved in a really rich hunting community. So over on a place that's crawling with deer and people fishing all the time and fish, and he's spent his life immersed in hunting and fishing. Whether that's a path he takes in his life is a choice for him, I suppose.
Yeah, that's great. I got a 8-year-old stepson, and he comes out with me 1 or 2 days every rut, and we've taken a couple deer together. I shoot him. He's just there for the ride. And then yesterday I took my my youngest. He's almost 3, and we went out flushing some hares out of the long grass with the 22, and had another mate there and his 4-year-old. So those two got to experience their first game scene killed, and they absolutely loved it. The smiles on their face were just priceless.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's the end of the podcast. That's all the questions I have for you. So I thank you very much for coming on. Social media side, if people want to hear more from you, see what you're doing with Blond Bay Hog Deer Advisory Group or with SSAA, where can they see all of this stuff?
Blond Bay Hog Deer on Facebook, and with SSAA on SSAA Victoria on Facebook or Instagram.
No worries. Awesome. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. But I really appreciate you coming on. I've learnt a hell of a lot, and it's just made me very, very itchy to get over to Snake Island.
Thanks a lot for having us on, Zach, and all the best. Wish you all the best of luck for your hunt on Snake. Hopefully I'll get to meet you at the briefing if I get over there. I quite often get over there for the Sunday briefings when I get a chance. So
awesome. Well, I definitely hope I get to put a face to the name and the voice, that's for sure. No, easy. Thank you for coming on, mate. And love all the work that you guys are doing over there.
Thanks, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Hunting Connection Podcast. Please head over to our social media and give us a follow. Instagram at Hunting Connection Podcast, Facebook at Hunting Connection Podcast, Twitter at Hunting Connect, TikTok at Hunting Connection Podcast. If you've enjoyed, please share with your friends and family, tag us in your photos and videos on social media, subscribe, rate and review to help grow the podcast. If you're interested in giving additional support to the podcast, you can head over to our podcast's Patreon page. Thank you very much for listening and catch you next episode.